Hey guys, it's Fifth Lauren, also known as 944. Don't forget Thorin's YouTube channel.
A trend we've seen recently has been teams taking a support player or someone who's one of the supportive elements and structure, foundational structure of their team, and replacing them either with another star player, a player who on his past team was a focal point of the offense, one of the big names, or just a more skilled player who doesn't necessarily have a past history of playing a supportive style or a support role in any context. I mean, a couple of recent examples obviously would be Mouse Sports, where they took out Sticko, obviously highly criticized player, replaced him with Snacks, former star player of Virtus Pro. SK Gaming, now MIBR. They removed Taco, back when they thought they were going to get Simple actually, but ended up having to replace him with Stewie, someone who'd been in-game leader, star player of Cloud9. And because Stewie came over and wasn't able to play a supportive role, they made Bolts have to take over some of Taco's roles. This is a dangerous trend, I think, as we'll get into. And funnily enough, what's surprising to me about the fact that so many pro players are doing it is this is actually a classic demand of fans, and especially the most casual fans who maybe don't know the structure of teams or how teamwork works within the game, or just watch for the frags and maybe don't understand the game on a deep level. Because the pull for us to have star players, really skilled players, the problem with that is it's the potential that you're looking at and seeing and thinking, these names are so crazy. If they all just shoot everyone, if they all just use their skill, take duels in the game, do we need supportive players? Can't they just do it themselves? Can't you just frag everyone? You might even point to a team like FaZe Clan and say, see, you don't even need supportive elements in the team. But for me, the flaw is that people are not seeing what the supportive element actually did within the team. In fact, sometimes I think even their teammates and the star players in the team don't quite appreciate it until it's gone. I think also there's a factor that people really underestimate the chemistry that a specific five-man lineup has. That's why whenever a team changes even one player, I always say, for me, I consider it a different team. It's rare that I think you can change out any player in the team and continue on playing exactly the same style, having exactly the same level of success, sometimes or even more success, as you did with a past team that was very good. Remember, it's 20% of the lineup is missing in the most pure sense, and depending on how important their role was or the knock-on effect of their role, could be more than 20%, could be less than 20%. So another factor is the chemistry aspect. I mean, there's that old adage, right, that a chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Now, in this sense, people are thinking a similar thing. They're thinking, right, well, we're not necessarily winning as many tournaments, or we're not placing as well as we should. And so let's look in the chain. There's the weakest link. So if we replace that for a stronger link, then we should work right. They could use the same adage against me. But I would say this, if it's a team that's having success, that's a good team, and then you replace what seems to be the weakest link. Well, the problem with that is, how do we evaluate the weakest link? The weakest link isn't necessarily the least skilled player or the player who plays the role that's the least glamorous, right? In certain teams, Astralis would be a great example of this. What would be considered the weak link in that sense, so it would be Zipnix, right, is actually one of the strongest links. He's one of the players that allows the star players to sometimes not have an amazing game, sets up the structure so that they can have so much talent elsewhere that's free to do what it wants, sets up the tactical basis of the team with the in-game leader, and is that rock solid aspect. So instead, I would say this, if you're winning tournaments, if you're regularly placing high in big tournaments, odds are you didn't really have a true weak link, and it probably wasn't that support player or supportive player. Because I think it's very rare you're ever going to win big tournaments, except maybe really crazy fluke one-offs, with a true weak link, a player that actually is just, it's clear you could remove him, replace him with a good player or a similar player, and things would just be fine. I mean, there's that concept. Funnily enough, there's an entire book written called The Third Mind, of where two minds come into interaction, meet each other, communicate. It's not anymore that you've just got mind A and mind B. What you actually get is you get mind A and mind B. You also get mind C, though. And mind C, the third mind in this context, is the interface between the two minds, where the overlap is, where things meet and connect or even battle each other. And that in itself is sort of a separate thing. The way you work together, the partnership that can be formed, is in some way informed by the two initial minds, but it can be not only more, it can be a synergy. can also sometimes be different in quality and nature to the two minds separately. And so you think, well, where does that come from? This is one of the mysteries of chemistry. I mean, funnily enough, people can understand this concept if you think of a crowd or a mob. Now, within that mob, you might have people whose morality means they would never attack someone. They would never shout someone down or boo someone if they were on their own. But put them into a crowd, put them into a baying mob, and what you'll typically find in that sense is people will often go down to the lowest common denominator qualities of the mob, the feelings of the mob, the emotions of the mob, and it can be a lot more primal, a lot more primitive, a lot more brutal than each of those individually nuanced, complicated people with different backgrounds, different thoughts, feelings, emotions might have otherwise been. And that applies to CS teams. That's why I think when you have a special lineup, even when you put in a better player on paper or a player who can even play that role in another team very well, you don't always get the same results because the chemistry of the 5 players together is sometimes what makes it so memorable, so special. That's one of the reasons why I can actually understand and have sympathy for Virtus.pro keeping that 5-man lineup for so many years, like half a decade, because when it was working, yes, you could look at already in the latter years, 2016, 2017, and see sometimes Pasha wasn't that good. Sometimes Neo had his issues. Taz at times fell off. But you looked at that lineup and you saw, but when it works, even if those players aren't as strong man for man as some of the top teams in the world, they could beat some of the best teams in the world. They could play to a level that seemed better than what the players on paper were able to seemingly deliver if you'd looked at them in isolation, just done the scouting report as a player. There was something extra, something like the third mind. In this case, it'd be the 6th mind, I guess, ignoring the coach, that emerged when the Virtus plow was in effect, when they were doing those crazy comebacks, when they were so gritty. Likewise, I'd also say, along with team chemistry, you got the communication. Again, you have a team mind in terms of communication. Think about all the players feeding information, not just to their in-game leader and to each other teammate, but everyone combined, and sort of the pool of all that information. And then the in-game leader's philosophy and how he's trained the other players, and the coach's philosophy as to how they then interpret that data and how the information then comes back, and each autonomous element of the unit actually then processes that and knows what to do, or knows based on that what information is telling him and what the possibilities are. Is another fact to consider, because there's actually a great 1.6 example, I think, of taking a player out who's clearly a worse player, clearly a less tenured, less decorated player, replacing him with a much more skilled player, a fabulous player in fact, and the team got much worse. And that is actually going to be NOA. This is the famous team that combined 3 Norwegian players with an American and a Canadian. And famously, when they put this squad together, their first big LAN came at the end of 2003. It was CPL Winter, which is one of the majors. And they had an epic run. They won tons of pistol rounds. They beat a bunch of the world's best teams, sometimes on their maps, like Adrenaline, Mouse Sports. And when they got to the final, the only team they lost to was the SK Sweden team, who was the undefeated, well, not quite undefeated, but had been undefeated in a while in maps. One of the absolute most dominant teams we've ever seen in Counter-Strike. That's the only team that beat them in that final. Now, what happened was, after this amazing run and performance, the team decided to replace BSL, who in past teams had been an in-game leader. He'd been a supportive element within the squad. He clearly wasn't one of the most skilled players in the team. Him and Knoxville were probably the least by far. They had fabulous players in Shagwa, Method, incredibly skilled. Nikon, pretty skilled player, but more of a stable Rock, Zipnix type player. They replaced BSL for obvious reasons, because they were able, due to having these Norwegians, having NA players that were friends of his, to convince Element, the star in-game leader of SK Sweden, that incredibly dominant team who'd won everything at the end of the year, to leave SK Gaming and come over and play in NOA and replace BSL. And BSL was replaced because Knoxville was somebody famously had cut BSL a number of times from his teams. Nikon was allied with Knoxville, very quiet player. Shagwa and Method just want to win. And also that, Method was a very close friend of Element's. And so they bring in Element. This seems like a surefire win because he's one of the best players in the world. In he comes. And you know what happened? They bombed a number of big international lands after doing so. And that's crazy because actually people were making the case towards the end of 2003 that Element might have been the best player in the world. Now, they're not the most skilled player. He wasn't a fabulously skilled player. He was a pretty good player. But his sense for where people were in the game, the fact that he was in-game leading simultaneously, and for an in-game leader was a pretty good fragger, this meant that understandably, this seemed like a pure upgrade that's 100% going to work. He was the in-game leader of the most dominant team at that point in time we'd ever seen. They'd won something like 41 out of their last 42 maps at the time that he came over to the team. They'd won all the tournaments in the latter half of the year. 2 CPL majors, a CPL Europe, Swedish Esports League. Without him, because he was Norwegian, they were Swedish, they won the World Cyber Games even. Incredibly dominant team. So in he came in 2004, and things seemed fine at first, because at the smaller lands, so they went to the ESWC USA qualifier, and even used a stand-in. They used Destructo, a player they'd taken from Rival, who's an NA player, so that they could have the 3 NA players they need to play in the qualifier. Won the qualifier, beating out all the top NA teams. So teams like Rival, teams like United 5 and 3D, who were the top ranked NA teams at the time. They were all there. They placed ahead of them with a stand-in. They went to ESWC, now with their real lineup, and they bombed. This is a major. And they made it to the second group stage, and they didn't manage to get out of their group. Top 2 out of 4 progresses. They lost to TSG, a team that is actually, no one even expected them to get out of the qualifier in NA. They'd been a surprise. They'd had just a good run of form. They had some good players, but beyond this, they didn't really accomplish much. They didn't go on too much. If anything, the players went elsewhere, the good players, and formed good teams like Complexity. Then you had them lose to the Russian Virtus Pro team that had Lex. Now, this is a team that famously had yet to do anything on LAN. At this tournament, they obviously went on to upset SK, so they were pretty epic, but they lost heavily to this team. They finally won 1 game, and the only game they won was against a Norwegian team called Clan IT, which were the leftovers of the Norwegian scene, and that's not really anything to brag about. Shortly after this, they went, and I think it was before this CPL, or was it afterwards? I think it might have been afterwards, that they played the Everlan, which was another LAN, which is all NA teams. They won that. They placed ahead of United 5, ahead of Team 3D, ahead of Evil Genius. Okay, really good performance again. But at the other major, CPL Summer, so a few weeks after ESWC, they didn't even make top 8. And top 8 was supposed to be the cutoff point for like just being a good team. Never mind going, if you're a top team, you want to be top 5, top 4. This team was appalling at this tournament. They started off the tournament in the lower bracket because they were a top seed. They got a team called Tau. And I'm not talking about the really old school one, which was from Texas and was a good team. This is where it was just essentially a mixed team of a bunch of invite level players, but who weren't that good, who didn't even go that deep in this tournament. And they lost 13-11, because it used to be max rounds 12 back then. They lost 13-11 on Inferno and got outplayed. So they lost to the upper bracket, went to the lower bracket. Okay, they went on a little run. They won 3 games in the lower bracket. One of them was against a team called GameWise, a low invite level team, who again, they only narrowly were able to edge out. It was 13-11 on Mill. They played against the British team Tag, who did terribly at this tournament, never did that well on LAN, only won 13-8. They then beat 4 Kings, the best UK team, but a team that at this point had heavily degraded, only beat them in overtime, and they then lost in overtime to Rival, who admittedly was a good team, but was a team that just sort of fucked around, played a loose style, had good skilled players, and happened to have it come together at the big CPLs, but didn't do much else. So they went out 9th to 12th at the CPL in terrible fashion. Now, when you look at when BSL was in their team with that amazing run at CPL, sure, maybe that was a one-off. Maybe winning the pistol rounds helped. Maybe Shagwar Method on a crazy tournament. I could believe all these things. But you look at how he played. One of the maps that really helped them on that amazing run to second place was Nuke. They won it against a number of elite Nuke teams. And one of the reasons why was in 1.6, to play Nuke, you had to be able to control the ramp room. If you don't, you are utterly fucked, and your guys at upper aren't going to be able to rotate and win the game. So one of the ways they were able to be so strong at ramp was BSL played that spot with Knoxville, the 2 weakest players in the team. But even though they didn't get along personally, they synergized so well in that position. There was also obviously a trio, again, a chemistry effect between BSL, Knoxville, and Nikon. They had played together in past teams in Norway. I mean, admittedly, Element also played with them at some of these teams, but they made up the supportive core of some of these teams. In this team, they were obviously making up the supportive core because Shagwar and Method were very individualistic players who were very skill-based, and you just let them play off that. They weren't necessarily the best team players. And with the star fragging of Shag and of Method, you had enough already firepower. Especially because Nikon, for someone who played like a rock position, was very solid in terms of firepower. Obviously, Shagwar Method being a star AWPer and a star rifler also kind of balanced out the team. You had enough skill, or just enough skill, to be a top team, but then you had the supportive core with chemistry, good comms, everything fit together. They even played site spots on a key map well together. Element came into the team, fabulous player. It messed everything up. Then you go over and think about the principle we're talking about here. So the principle here on why it's dangerous to upgrade like this is mainly in teams where it's working. Like, I don't necessarily blame MIBR entirely because the team had degraded generally. I just think that they picked the wrong player with Taco to necessarily replace. I think they should have thought of some of the other players. Now, in terms of Mouse Sports, I think that was a terrible move because I think they were a very, very good team. I don't think they will go on to be as good with Snacks, despite the fact Snacks may yet continue to be a better player than Sticko as a raw player. I don't think he'll be a better supportive element than I can see it messing the team up. So the problem here is, if you're a team that's already winning, or you're very close like Mouse Sports was, recognize what that takes to be able to do that. That it takes all the members of the team. Everyone's doing something. Everyone's playing some role. Maybe you can tweak things. Maybe you can swap a role. But everyone somehow is contributing to the chemistry, the communication, the overall team effort. It's not happening just because of some players. And it's rarely happening in spite of a player when you're having this level of success. A rare example might be when Simple was in Na'Vi at the beginning of the year, where he really was godlike and they were placing very highly in spite of a couple of players playing really poorly, like Edward, in spite of Electronic not doing much when he's in the supportive role. Okay, that's a rare example. And what did that take for it to be the exception to the rule? Oh, only probably the best player to ever play Counter-Strike in terms of you just look at that an individual 3-month span of time. Then I guess you could also make the case there was the G2 in 2016 that was able to win ECS, almost won EPL, but that was when they had Smiths, who was playing pretty poor with the AWP. But you know what? Kind of an outlier there, because what made up for the fact they had Smiths playing fairly poorly with an AWP and then a rookie in terms of body? They had Shocks, one of the best players to ever play Counter-Strike, one of the most complete players, completely going off. Oh, and he was in a duo, an amazing rifle duo of Shocks and Scream. Scream also playing career best Counter-Strike. So two absolutely beast players, arguably the best duo in the game. I'd even have picked them over Cold Zero and Fallen, even though they had the same success at Majors that year. So you had the best duo in the world. Yeah, that can make up for having a supportive AWPer who doesn't necessarily do his job very well. But actually, in that case, he at least knows the other players and knows their personality and maybe even contributed something in terms of supportive element. So for me, you only do an upgrade for that kind of player, for a skilled player, if it's a clear upgrade all round. Like, it can be a more skilled player, but it's got to be one that can play that role. It's got to be one that fits your style. It's got to be one that has strengths that are going to add to your team, that don't just overlap strengths you already have, and don't miss out on strengths you might be losing from the support player who otherwise might not be that good. Also helps if you can get a player that's experienced. I think it's dangerous to get someone who doesn't have experience playing these sorts of roles or at that level. Otherwise, you are gambling. And by the way, you're gambling not just that you'll improve, you can get worse, you can regress, you can go down in the rankings, you can be a much worse team, and you can have other players in the team play worse now because they're not getting something they didn't realize would be missing when the supportive element left. That's why when you really do have those clear upgrades, or you have those players who have some skill and can play the supportive role, those guys can pretty much write their own checks because in some sense they're worth their weight in gold. The obvious examples the last few years have obviously been Zipnix from Dignitas, TSM, and now Astralis. There's no universe in which they're kicking him. NBK, I know a lot of fans might hate on him, but every top French team would want NBK in their team. Existence said as much when they were spitballing, putting this G2 lineup together. This guy can write his own checks and isn't going to be getting cut anytime soon, no matter what people on the outside think. I think this is one of the reasons, personally, it's one of the reasons I speculate as to why AZ has been seemingly a permanent member in North who just cannot be removed. Because I think all in all, he's got decent skill. You look at him in the team, he seems like he plays a consistent supportive element within the squad, does what MSL wants, fills in the holes they want. This is something that coaches and in-game leaders love, and people love to play with people like that. Taco obviously stayed a long time in SK before they removed him. Virtus Pro have kept Neo forever, even when he hasn't been the in-game leader, because he can do some of these elements, because he can be clutch from the supportive position, because he can play more of a consistent role while the other stars, obviously the trio of stars, went off and fragged everyone. It's really dangerous because it is a gamble, and sometimes you're gambling for something that might not even be needed. A little bit more skill, a bit more of a flashy player, playmaker, when maybe what you needed instead was either one of the other stars to be replaced or to integrate better this supportive element with some other aspect of the team, changing the style of the team. It's a danger because it's a gamble that you could lose. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.